Welcome everyone to Health Founder Masterclass 002. Today we're going to talk about agents and ways of working. This is really a transformation discussion. My name is Kroom Lawrence, one of the founders of HealthFounderOS, which is designed for CEOs and CXOs who are ramping up with AI and managing through lots of organizational complexity. One of my favorite people on the planet who's with us this morning is Jeff Godish. Jeff and I have been friends for many, many years, probably from the early 2000s when Jeff was at GSK, I was at Wyeth, and then both of us have gone through tours of duty through agencies and been on several really interesting enterprise-wide transformations with big pharma and around healthcare and even some non-healthcare work, which is pretty cool. So Jeff, why don't you say hi and welcome aboard?
Yep. Hey, hello everyone. Thanks, Kroom, for inviting me along on this party. And like Kroom said, this is just a great opportunity to kind of reconnect with life sciences and pharma friends and colleagues, share a little bit of information. I think that Kroom as the Sherpa on this presentation is a great choice because of the agency, plus big brand and pharma brand work along with the transformation work. And here we are, we're at a jumping off point for thinking about, really putting AI and agents to work today on life sciences businesses.
Awesome, Jeff. So glad you're here. Super fun to be connected. So last time on Sunday, at noon, which was our first live streaming of HealthFounderOS, we talked about turning AI into your operating system. We talked a lot about the single brain. We talked about challenges of having lots of LLM-powered employees who are supercharged with all kinds of knowledge, but yet there was a significant drag on the organization. So we talked about how do you set up multiple tools to bring your team together on one central set of LLMs to get organizational efficiency. And so this time we want to talk about, how do you get there? How do you go from wherever you are in your organization to a future state, to improve decision speed for CEOs? How do we improve campaign velocity for CMOs, improving commercial follow-ups for CCOs, and then overall financial management for CFOs? A lot of what we talk about and what's been interesting on various panels around the industry is really how small can teams get. And so Jeff and I have both spent many years in large enterprises, and then we've spent time taking all this best practices, distilling it down for startups. We might have a single founder who might have a very lean budget, or maybe even have zero budget, and how can they use agentic tools and the new stack to be superheroes in their realm and to do clinical work and go to market. So, we want to focus a little bit on transformation today. How do we get to be more agentic, even first steps, so that it's safe, it's compliant and comfortable, as we kind of go into this new era. I think it's safe to say, for all of us, on this side of the fence and for many on the call, that everybody's been experimenting with LLMs for since October of 2022. And then we know with OpenClaw and Hermes and all of the incredible tools that have come out now agentically, it's like it's a whole nother world, right? And it changes every single week. And so the first thing that I'd like to do is go through some quick news items from this week. And it's like, it's a bunch of WTF moments. This is how Peter Diamandis from Moonshot's podcast phrases it. I think that's exactly right. He's one of my heroes. And so I'm going to refer to some of his comments from the Moonshot podcast that I think are really astounding. And number one is, moving to a single brain. We talk a lot about that. I think that translates into Slack, plus Hermes, plus your open router, which is access then to any LLM you want. Some are premium like Mythos, others are free, and that's great. That means you're always on, regardless of if government decides to put them in a box for a little while. Your brain is not going to stop, which I think everyone's been experiencing on Claude when you run out of tokens, your $10 is out, and the whole thing just stops. It's very frustrating, especially if you're not at the desk. But the big trend on number one here is protecting your intellectual property. So it's a huge theme of this week, where there's a lot of concern at the government level, even at the national defense level, and obviously at the corporate level. We are continuously putting our proprietary data into Claude. Claude then is able to commodify that, productize that, and then roll out new initiatives. So there's a lot more light on the importance of having control over your brain on your own hardware. And so there's a move to local control. Local also speaks to open source models that are of lots of different capabilities and get better and better over time. But the point is protect your IP, protect your data. Do not upload it into Claude, and that's often been said, over the last couple of years. But now, we need to sharpen the pencil on that. Jeff, your thoughts, sir?
Look, this is life sciences. Some things have changed. Some things have stayed the same. Whether you are global pharma or you are a single founder, your challenge remains to put your IP to work, right, in really productive ways, still maintaining the asset value and the proprietary nature, right? All of that represents business assets that have to do two things: be protected, yet deliver some value by being put to work internally and outside the company. This is part of the new model for how that's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So news number two is, we all know about Mythos. We now have access to it through Fable 5. We know it's throttled, and it is incredible. So, the first thing I did was I ran Fable 5 on my own agentic stack. I updated the entire operating system I use here on my Mac Mini. And then that just generated a whole bunch of operating improvements. There were no security vulnerabilities. I know Mythos was sort of flagged for, identifying security issues, which is great. But just, use Fable 5 to look at the integrity of your overall operating system. And, are you optimized at home? Which is great, right? It's an easy first use case. The news number three, which I think is really important, there's been a lot of discussion, in the news and everywhere on, is AI going to take jobs or is it going to increase jobs? Generally, if we think back to every technology innovation that has ever happened, it has often led to expansion of more jobs, more wealth creation, more cool stuff people can do. Obviously with AI, more entrepreneurs doing more cool stuff and more superpowers for everybody. But this study that came out of Ramp Economics Lab this week sort of paints a positive picture that says of 21,559 U.S. firms studied, where they're observing data, from their firm Ramp, that headcount growth over 2 years following adoption of AI among firms that are early adopters, headcount actually grew. Why? Because those businesses are growing. So, Jeff, we've often said, you can't shrink your way to success, right? That's an old trope from many years ago. Same here, right? We're talking about good businesses that are powered now with new AI superpowers. They are hiring more people, they're retaining people, and people are getting trained up and doing great stuff. Interestingly, also 12%. Oh yeah, Jeff, go ahead, jump in there. Sir.
I was just going to observe. Look, you don't have to look far. Recent news: Ford Motor Company, plenty of intellectual horsepower there, plenty of AI and forward-looking analytics transformation planning. Rehiring 350 automotive engineers that they let go whenever AI started to blow up. Right. So this is beginning to just show us that it turns out that we still need, not just humans in the loop, but really humans thinking about how to aim it, how to drive it, how to guide it, because it's a whole nother tool. But yet, the expertise that you already had tied up in human brains still required, big and small. And we're here to try to help put that into some perspective around how that might work for a relatively different size, from relatively small to relatively large life sciences companies.
Fantastic. And so one quick add, here on the slide is that these AI adopters are, yes, they are redesigning work. They are expanding throughput. They are pushing workload to the agents, but it's creating demand for people who can operate with agents. And so, we're constantly sort of delivering that charter of everybody, get your hands on keyboard, find any hard drive in your house and practice with a Hermes or an OpenClaw and just see what it does. Use it in your personal life. Use it in a sandbox project. For example, I launched VascuMind.ai 2 weeks ago. Right? It's a playground to try to stand up a whole business and let the agents just run safely and compliantly, and just to see, what can it do, right? And then Jeff, as we get personally comfortable, then we can take steps in healthcare organizations where there are really critical gates, like compliance gates and important technology and infrastructure and important roles and important people that are doing really essential things, and have a good, well-groomed roadmap, right? Which is what transformation is all about. So perhaps with that, Jeff, maybe you would walk us through, I think these are 3 or 4 slides on transformation then and now. So I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
And look, just to set the next couple of slides up, and not to drain them, but it turns out that we are in businesses that we've been in for a long time, right? The business of building life sciences brands has not changed so much fundamentally, yet our tool sets have changed. But here's the thing, all of that transformation work, all of the work that's been done over the past probably at least 10 years, if not longer, that is all springboard and previous investment into what we're going to do next. So understanding the pieces that still are incredibly relevant and foundational is really big. So just to kind of recap at a high level, we have put enormous attention at senior executive levels all the way down to very tactical into trying to do a better job integrating people so that we have one strategy or a set of strategies that everyone can rally around, right? And teams then have, shared direction and everyone's going in the same direction. And then we've worked with our IT partners and analytics partners to pull together a tech infrastructure purpose-built to drive that pharma brand or business, and put all the investment into that. And then we've put people into workflow. We've built the marketing ops COE. There are all kinds of investments that are still every day is valuable. They may be considered old model, but they are actually our jumping off point for sliding our new our new engines in very strategically. So it really comes down to understanding what stays and continues to do its job and how we can do that job better. If you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great point.
What happened, if we really step back, what happens is customers get a lot faster than manufacturing suppliers in our industry, right? Because they just do their work. Their customers, they have their own ways of working and their own models. Their consumption of pharma and life sciences products and services is really moving as fast as they can possibly go in their industry. So what's happened is they may have in some cases outpaced us, or in some cases moved the goalposts into needing completely new things. So now this is our opportunity to take that existing infrastructure that already exists and start to springboard into the idea that we have an enterprise, for example, that is anytime, anywhere, 24/7, cross-device, customer at the center, but always on. And that's a big shift. It's not just, in your time zone. And if you run your eyes across some of these changes, it really comes down to now, trying to take the organization, all the things it knows how to do, give it help in the form of AI and agentic infrastructure, and then allow it to run in real time. Act with agentic help that we actually know individual customers, and be so networked that we actually surround these customers and these organizations with our brand presence or with our outbound communication. So that's where we're starting, and that's where transformation needs to go.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jeff, I was thinking back to our work with some very large enterprises where we have a North Star slide. That was like the big splash, and we would say, we're going to be personalized, we're going to be always on, we're going to be we're going to meet our customers where they are, and we're going to create a lead distribution solution, in the organization. So as people come into the business, whether it's through, marketing touches or through sales touches or through service or even through care, those leads would go in and get to the right part of the business, and then the business would have lots of use cases and capabilities. Yep. I think that's still exactly right? So the foundation for all that is correct. Now the question is, what bullets do you add, at the bottom, which is, we have to recognize agents are going to be taking on some of this work. We have to recognize the importance of the human beings that we have, and we need to now come up with sort of the operating model of how we go to the next level. And so that's what's really exciting about, our work and the slides to come as we kind of unpack that.
Yeah. Just to make it more tangible, I remember being in a meeting where that North Star, Krum, part of the North Star was we were changing the way that organization operated, which was a big ask because it was really a global enterprise. But the idea that CRM was updated monthly and we were modifying it to be updated weekly, that was enormous at the time.
Right.
The idea that it might be updated hourly now or in literally real time as signals are arriving, to the organization was almost unthinkable. But that's what today is that's what's happening today. So we have come so far, and we have working models that are doing this.
Yep, pretty cool. I have to add one thing as well. HubSpot is incredible. And in that is an AI agent called Breeze, and it is spectacular on what is the next best action, what are the next best messages, and it just creates it right there for you. It's an example of a SaaS solution that has AI embedded, that is incredibly personalized and tailored to individuals in the HubSpot. And so, that's cool, right? But we also want to recognize, we need to have HIPAA protected, privacy safe, owned hardware and owned software where we can get the kind of speed, that kind of personalization, that works in a healthcare setting. And so, it's a little bit of a lot of learning and some dynamic tech stack work, aligned with that North Star vision, is the job, right? Yeah. Okay, so here's the next slide, Jeff.
Yep. So where does that kind of take us, right? It takes us from our very carefully built infrastructure and springboard into a new world in a lot of ways, or at least a new phase, right? Where we are now an enterprise response engine that has very agile teams and governance set up, right? This is where the humans with help are acting as gatekeepers and ensuring that decisioning that can happen very much in the background and very much constantly stays in the guardrails and makes sense for the business. So what you're really doing is, at this point, our old governance model was really about trying to say, hey, we don't have enough people to do that job. Our new model, our new enterprise response model says we're experts into key slots and we're surrounding them with the agentic support and AI-driven decision support that they need to make the best decisions and to keep things going in that direction. Like back to the North Star and back to what the brand really stands for. That's what we're delivering against, but we're empowering people to do that. And it turns out that we may actually have the ability to hold on to that brain trust, and grow those people's careers as we add all of this support.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. And so, this is where we landed, with just trying to, make the organization work better. Like all the people process data, that was all about coordination and using scarce resources, resource constrained, right? Now we have resources that run 24/7. They never complain. They're always thinking for us. And so what we're doing now is pulling those into an infrastructure that allows for humans to leverage that. The old model was about handoff. We're still doing that. We're just handing off between where is the best point of decisioning happening.
Yeah, fantastic. That sparked so much thinking around, what was the most frustrating process in all of biopharma? Probably the medical legal process, right? It took months. In other words, you'd spend a ton of money and put a lot of work in, submit something into MLR, you get a review weeks later, you make changes, you go back several weeks later, you make another round of changes, then you would implement, program, QC, take it live, submit 2253 forms, and then, a half a year has gone by, right? And so, that's probably one of the longest and, most challenging processes on the commercial side of the organization. And so, as we get into, human roles and things we can automate, we will ask the question, can that process be automated or improve the fidelity in a future state? As an example, we'll talk about a few more use cases in a minute.
Yeah. And to kind of wrap that a little bit, you're at the point now where the concept, like stepping way back of the commercial organization, really acting as kind of, as an analogy, a big set of manufacturing pipelines. We're manufacturing claims, we're manufacturing Salesforce deployment, we're manufacturing data and decisioning. Now we have tools that will help that whole infrastructure be so much more agile. And now it's about kind of fine tuning and moving work through with the human oversight. But getting humans out of checking boxes in workflows and worrying about who's next on the approval chain, all those kinds of business processes that were just nothing really but friction compared to where we are today, are ways we can really turn an organization into like it's a little overused, but a turbocharged manufacturing operation to get done whatever the commercial work product is that has to move through that.
Yeah. All right, brilliant. Okay, let's keep cooking. So we wrote an article in PM 360, came out about 2 weeks ago, called The Irreplaceable Human. The Marketing Singularity Needs You, right? So there's been a lot of discussion on the organizational singularity where whole enterprises are transforming. This was a slice around marketing itself. And our thesis is, you need humans badly at the helm who know what they're doing and who can navigate through, all these changes, right? So in our article and what we were writing, we talked about, 3 new layers. One is the human judgment layer. We're going to talk about brand and taste. We're going to talk about clinical science and judgment there. We're going to talk about customer signals coming in. We're going to talk about compliance and strategy, and then managing the stack itself. The brain operating layer, and I think brain it's a little bit too fancy of a word. What we're talking about, I think it's as simple as, setting up a Slack. You add your Claude or your Hermes or whatever you want into the Slack channels. Everyone's working off the same LLM or sets of LLM. All the saved memory is there for everyone to use. So if you're writing a plan or a brief or a media plan or personas or strategy artifacts or customer lists or managing, next best actions or whatever it might be, everyone has lots of visibility into the artifacts and can sort of be on the same page. One of the things that has sort of driven me a little crazy the last couple of months would be, in a situation where you have competing LLMs. So and here's how it goes. It's like, take a plan. Somebody writes a plan and it's pretty good. It's only about, 60% AI slop. There's some AI hyper verbalization going on. Somebody else writes another plan. It's largely the same, but now you have to reconcile these two plans. And if somebody has sort of a dog in the fight, it could be, well, my LLM is better than your LLM, or my plan's better than your plan. And what I've seen over that is you have these then very robotic back and forths where the LLMs are really competing. And so suddenly the humans aren't even using their voice. They're like, hey, Claude, write me an email that is really persuasive to convince this person that my plan is better than their plan, and why they should go with my stuff. And what does that mean? What that means to me is that those individuals have commodified themselves. In other words, it's like LLM, write an email to that other LLM, and then it goes back and forth like ping pong. I think those humans have lost touch with, the fact that the human needs to add value. What is the human judgment? Did the human actually read the plan? Did they go in and chop out all the slop and just boil it down to the most important parts so the organization can manage and execute against that plan? But I think if you have humans on their own in their own silos, it just gets into this sort of weird competitive space that I think is counterproductive and creates drag. And so, I'm a fan of the single brain. I'm a fan of going to Slack or just having one sort of source of truth around the AI execution layer. And I think the organizations that can get to that, they're gonna 10x people that are still bogged down with sort of these gladiator matches of my LLM smarter than your LLM kind of stuff. Anyway, Jeff, I'll pass it to you.
And look, that whole back and forth, things happen that we've been doing for decades, right? One plan gets written because and it's pretty good, but it tapped one set of data. Another plan gets written, but it actually somehow utilized some field sales ops performance information that maybe wasn't present in the first plan. Now we're trying to resolve those two, and we're actually going backwards into what was the input data, what were those assumptions. Yeah. The idea of eliminating all of that and getting onto a single operating layer is what really allows for that far less friction and far more focus on outcomes, because we're all in essential agreement on the inputs. So it's right. It's where we are today.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. The agreement on the inputs is key. So we developed 6 human roles that I think are real, and I think these are domains for all of us to lean in. What's interesting, kind of, Jeff, is it may not have to be a single human, but they may be personas or hats. You might remember back in the day we would do like these red hat, blue hat exercises around team building, but it might be that the marketer has to look at it with a clinical lens, or look at it with a legal lens, or look at it from an insights lens. Or maybe your attorney has to look the other way and say, look, here's a marketing outcome we need. These are the absolutes of the compliance, but here's some latitude, that is well within, the law, et cetera. So I think training people on these archetypes, and then, you could have a single dominant owner for them, but just understanding these roles, I think, is really insightful. So we're going to take a few minutes and go through each one. And so I'll do one, and then Jeff, you're going to do one, and we're going to have just some fun going back and forth. So, when the notion of taste maker, what is taste? Taste is a very human sort of sense of, I like it. This resonates for me. Going back into creative advertising, it's always been a sense of, doing customer listening, getting in the insights, briefing those insights. Creative team comes up with a whole bunch of concepts. You launch the advertising concept of the TV ad. The customer's like, yes, I see myself in this ad. This is amazing. You didn't insult me. I felt attracted to this ad. I can remember it. And I see myself now going to the doctor to ask for brand X, and then brand X is granted. But the notion of brand and taste and creative standards and tone, that's 100% domain for a human. We're not going to outsource that to the bots. And so I would suggest that any sort of personal cultivation, dare I say, in the arts, or learning to write well, or learning to copyright well, and to communicate well. Dare I say, even show up in a video, right? Got my hair cut this morning. It probably didn't help much, but just showing up on the human level, Jeff, is essential, right? So there's a role around the brand leader, creating the brand voice, getting the tone. And we know in healthcare that if the tone is wrong, you could trigger a sense of fear. Like if you put an ambulance in an advertisement, that causes fear. It's repelling. I've done that, right? I've developed advertising that went the wrong direction, right? You don't want to provoke anxiety. You want to provoke calm and comfort. And so, this is an individual who would be looking at the content. They have a role around gating that, reviewing it, making sure it's on brand, on tone. And so, creating a taste file, for example, in memory, in the bot, with approved examples and even banned phrases or empathy rules, something to cultivate and frankly have a little fun with, because we want to project warmth and being inviting and care and differentiate around that. So that's I think this is one of my favorite subjects. But being a brand leader, as a human, that's not going to go to the bots. Okay, Jeff, your thoughts? Or we can go to the next one.
Only to just thinking slightly bigger picture, right? Like the very tip of the Marcom iceberg, or the omni-channel communications outbound, job that commercial does. This doesn't really change. Someone leads a brand, very worried about the long-term consistency of the value proposition and really the positioning, and how we're landing with audiences that are going to decide on us versus competitors. So this tastemaker role is not so different than what we've actually seen for a long time. But the tastemaker role and the brand leadership role has a lot of help now. And now it's up to us to make sure that help is used and go faster and be smarter. And that's what's going to happen with all of these roles. These roles are going to be places where we've put investment into the organization previously, and now we're saying they're even more important, giving them help.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Excellent. And so, Jeff, you got the clinical interpreter.
Hey, pharma brands, life sciences companies, delivery of health, actually the manufacturing and delivery of healthcare, again, has not changed so much. At the end of the day, we have this enormous clinical responsibility to the scientific community, to the medical community, and ultimately to the patient community. But it doesn't really change the way the organization operates. At data, we're still looking at understanding how that data needs to be interpreted, or needs to be landed and then interpreted by the decision-making audiences. In a lot of cases, that's the HCP audiences. So this role of clinical interpreter has now help, because they have the ability to make sure they're looking at a single point that contains all of the clinical data, or all of the clinical interpretation, and what's been in market and what hasn't, and what resonated and what didn't. So it's an enormously important piece of the org structure puzzle. But now we can maybe ask more of these roles. Now that you have help us move faster, help us be more insightful around our clinical workflows. Kareem, I don't know.
Yeah. What's interesting here, my thought goes to, faithfully publishing the clinical data, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies, absolutely with 100% integrity on what is that data. But then it goes into the LLMs. And so a consumer could research the company, or research the product, or the clinical trajectory, and the LLM could draw its own conclusions, right? And the patient could be influenced in one way or another. Jeff, how do you think about the role of the organization on delivering the clinical data, and how does that connect to what a consumer might actually read on the other end if they're on their Grok or if they're on their Claude?
Yep.
What do you think about that?
Look, everybody, as an industry, we've known that patients and their caregivers, their engagement and knowledge level, because of this thing called the internet, has gone nowhere but higher, higher, and higher, right? So when they are now, especially with serious diseases, they are more prepared when they walk into the office and talk to their HCP than they've ever been. And now, before they even get there, they're consulting their favorite platform. Hey, Claude, what do you think about this? Or here's another fun application. Hey, Claude, I have 2 or 3 choices in potential treatment. When you review the clinical data and the published trial data, what's your indication of the most efficacious, of my treatment choices that I should land on? That, and now they're going to have that discussion with their HCP.
Yeah, right?
I mean, the game may just blow up in the office, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, they go in there, they may find like an old drug that, may be the right one, or something new, or something in a clinical study, or may not be on formulary. I mean, it changes a lot of things, because now they're backed with, data and maybe some evidence to suggest they're a good candidate for this drug. It's something, right?
Right.
Yeah. So a lot there. So the insight conduit. So I think this is a very interesting one, where we're talking about signals coming back in from customers. This is a little bit of the sales role. We've often talked about the sales rep as the quarterback. They're the closest to the doctor. The doctors are the closest to the patient, and they're literally on the front line, and the whole organization's trying to wrap around that sales rep and make them productive, to have great conversations, have great materials, and then they're getting feedback. A doctor or a patient may be saying, they might provide feedback on the product or the service, or access problems, or safety problems, or adverse event issues. I mean, all these things are signals coming back in. And so the question is, how are those signals getting back in? And then how are they being triaged appropriately? So, we think that there is the human needs to be here to help listen for that feedback, translate that from, doctor, AKA other humans, and then get that back into the brain, right? And how does that happen? Is it through entire meeting notes? Is it through, post call notes, etc.? But the idea here is that, AI now is trained on internal documents, and it may be missing what the market is actually saying. So we know our brains are getting, they're doing research constantly, they're staying up to speed, but they may not be hearing what their customers are thinking and feeling. And so we want to, there's a sort of discussion on pruning or deleting or cutting out old parts of your memory. Maybe it's outdated, or maybe it, somehow it's you need to retire it, and then refreshing it so that the assumptions are new, right? And if you get onesies, twosies, like you think back to primary research, with exploratory information coming in, and then, primary qual and quant, and then quantifying that and saying, this is statistically likely to apply to my segmentations, and let's go use this finding or this insight in our planning process. It's hard, right? So I think this is this needs to be built out, and it needs somebody with some really good judgment to figure out, what customers are saying, how that goes back in, and is it a big deal? Is it a big boulder, or is it a nit and not that big of a deal? We'll learn more as we get into this, don't you think, Jeff?
Yep, and as health and pharma communication strategists, we've been looking for those insights for our whole careers. And what's happened is that insight now is kind of in the middle of a longer workflow. So what we've got is orders of magnitude more signals coming in, right, that are now being interpreted and given weight. All of that trying to find its way down the conduit to give us an insight that either confirms something we already know, which is very helpful, right, telling us we're doing, or gives us a reason to make a change. And then post insight, rest of the conduit, how are we going to implement? So this is so pivotal, right? Because we cannot grow businesses if we cannot understand an insight that will help to open up more usage occasions, broaden the patient pool, or be more meaningful to our HCP audiences. So couldn't be more critical. And this is all going to be done through channels, right? It's omni-channel, and it's going to be done through, the back end CRM.
Awesome. Yeah, great point. Okay, so that's human role number 3. Need it, can't live without it. And then human role number 4. Over to you, Jeff.
Yep. And this role, we're really hoping that this becomes kind of a change from an MLR workflow and gatekeeper and approver, which still has to happen, but with help, right? With agentic and decisioning support help, that role may actually become more of what I think is really appropriately named the compliance architect. How are we big picture thinking about compliance in its many aspects? And how are we putting humans with augmented capability into decision-making roles where they don't need a month to review something because of all the nuances? Maybe what's happened is we've got 3 versions of some approved marketing communication that went into market. They're all slightly different, but we now allow our AI tools to highlight exactly those differences. And humans don't need to try to decode that, right? It can be brought forward to them. And that's just one very tactical example. But this role, and by the way, this role will continue to exist in pharma forever. If you don't know who that person is yet, they will come find you, hopefully. Right. But at the end, it turns out that they can be like far more part of the solution than part of the gatekeeper and the agility and workflow speed process management that we've wasted so many resources on.
And so, Jeff, question to you is, what do you think about if you spin up a legal bot and you're pre-screening your marcoms in advance? Does that get you closer to the pen of approvability? Because we all know you go into MLR, they just destroy your marketing content, and then you have to go back and do a rewrite or do small revisions. But we would always start, let's say, you could say aggressively, right? The job of creative advertising is to push further out, to push the envelope a little bit, and then we know MLR is going to bring it back a little bit, and then you get to an alignment on what can go into market, et cetera. But what do you think? What do you think about pre-screening materials, and is that a good idea? Is that does that unlimited? Does that unnecessarily limit the thinking? What do you think?
I think what's happening is every function, but in particular functions like MLR and related compliance, where it is so nuanced and so subjective that it really takes time by humans, and it has for decades, right? That's how it's always been. Now what's coming in is decision support, and I think what ends up happening is, where and how do humans develop the trust in the decision support that they're getting, right? And so that can only be done repetitively and over time, because there are a lot of problems in AI powered decision support. Every day we read about it. So only at the point that your MLR humans can say, hey, that is really helping me. When I set these 2 things side by side, I trust, because it's worked for me 50 times in the past, I trust it to show me these differences, which I can then determine are important or not. So I think if it's not already here in some more advanced organizations, it's coming because we don't have enough time, and we absolutely need to leverage the brain power these humans have. So I'm excited about this one only because it's been such a, such a not a constraint on our ability to get into market, essentially, and launch businesses. So back to you, Krum. I think we're on firm ground with where this is going. And once the trust is there, and maybe we even ask them to help develop the rule bases of the tools that are going to be used, then we're in much better shape.
Yeah, I love that. And earlier we talked about flexing our brains across all 6 of these human roles. And so the brand leader, the taste maker, she or he needs to keep compliance in mind, right? They're, as a healthcare marketer, you already know all about, FDA, FTC, Hatch Act, Sunshine Act, all those great things. And so you are building material to spec, within those constraints. And so, kind of putting on your legal hat, in advance of the MLR review, it's probably the right thing to do. And you're going to get a little closer to the pen on your claims and your materials, things of that nature. So that's a good one. So the strategy calibrator is an interesting role. Jeff, you and I have had strategy in our titles, for many years, and people always ask, what is strategy? What is strategy, right? We don't have to unpack exactly the history of a strategist, but the idea is objectives are where you're going, strategies how you're going to get there, and then strategy planning. And healthcare, used to take the annual planning cycle, and then you'd have strategy plans and briefs and personas and landscapes and SWOTs and marketing plans and media plans and measurement and KPI plans. And then you run those optimization loops. And you can, I think back to, even pre-COVID, we would talk about, we went from an annual planning cycle, then to quarterly planning, and then it was monthly. And then now with AI, you could spin up an entire planning cycle overnight, right? Where you're ingesting data and insights, the plans and the briefs and the messaging and the execution, is automated, and it is just ready to go out the next day, but not just like one to all, but in hundreds of versions, which is, has been, creative optimization technologies. Now that's really on steroids. But the strategy calibrator, needs to be fluent in the strategy planning process, and then I think they're listening for things that are on the rails and things that are off the rails. So it's a little bit of taste, a little bit of just dynamics of, okay, these are our firm business outcomes, our firm smart goals. This is how we're going to make money. This is the taste and style, within the compliant environment, and then here is our, communications loops that are happening, extremely rapidly. And you're listening for, is that loop, on brand, on goal, et cetera, or has it fallen out? And if it falls out, maybe that's a heck of a great pilot. And maybe you need to run that test cell and see if that's the next big thing. But, anyway, so these are, again, back to the human, who can navigate and appreciate strategy planning and execution, and just keep an eye on the ball as agents take on more and more of the work. Jeff, your thoughts?
You presented a thought that I thought was quite powerful, which is, hey, maybe we have the opportunity here to ask more of the strategic calibrator than we have in the past, right? So your thought was, that you articulated earlier, was, hey, now we are in the middle and getting to the point where an analytics transformation is no longer in process. We're now sending better data and better analytics into the strategy process than we ever have. So, Krum, I wonder what your thought is around how that strategic role changes and adds more value.
Yeah, they're two things. The first thing on analytics is, in the last 6 months, you can API everything into your brain, everything out of Google, everything out of Meta, everything out of your other, content platforms like YouTube and X, and all that data is piped into your central nervous system, all day, every day. And so your access to real-time data is just awesome, right? So, the core analytics the marriage of strategy analytics has always been, just a match made in heaven, right? And the analytics partner and the strategy partner did two things, but heavily connected, going from findings and facts into insights and judgment and guidance, right? But now that the data pipes are so awesome, and you could see everything all at once and get incredible reports, every single morning in your inbox. So that's the analytics story, which is cool. The second thing is, I think strategy planning is the same. In other words, we're always going from, plan, activate, and measure. And those are the loops that we're going to just run in these continuous cycles. I think, as I go back to my strategy library here, I pull out, David Aker for brand planning, and I pull out my, Al Reese on the art of positioning, and if you're going to be doing naming, how do you do that well? How do you write a positioning statement
You're taking us back into the library there, buddy. That's
when you look at your competitive set, where's the open space?
Right.
How do you launch and become unique in a competitive set? So I think the seasoning and the judgment and know what cards to play and when, I think is still exactly right. Because at the end of the day, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and where they landed was, we've got to get inside the heads of our customers. The brand lives in the head of the customer, right? And how do you influence that and shape that perception with the messaging and the experience and the ease and the comfort of solving their problems, and all the cool things that, we grew up doing in the marketing and brand realm, right? So I think that's still right. And I love our heritage of David Ogilvy, and I love the heritage of, big brands like Nike and Apple and Coke and all the great things they did to sort of be present in the minds and in the ambitions of our customers. I think that's all still right. And I think you even said it earlier, which is brand is that durable, the durable who, right? It is a brand is a personality. They're with you. They're in your life for years, right? And the brand doesn't have to change much. The positioning and the messaging and the campaigns can change, but there's got to be a durable sort of that brand is part of your life for a long time. And I think that's one of the cool areas of judgment of the strategy calibrator of, like, the Tony the Tiger, still Tony the Tiger. They're still on the box of Frosted Flakes, right? They've been around for a long time, and that's created the memory device and the personality and the positioning and the point of difference, and then the creative execution can happen and is translated into lots of different channels. But that stuff is fun.
That was amazing, and it was the best work we ever did, right? And the most intellectually rigorous work that we ever did, surrounded by people, who were all equally passionate and talented to get that work done. But I think maybe like a way of closing off, where the strategy, the value of this strategic calibrator goes today, right? It is orders of magnitude difference. The strategic leader or that strategy team, they have never been better informed than they are right now with competitive set, what's going on in the ecosystem, how is the business performing, right? Or at least they have the opportunity to be. And we're going to talk in a couple minutes about how to start to set that up to bring this real-time, broad data and point of view into this role, right? Because the better informed and the better understanding that this strategy team or whoever is leading that, work stream, if you will, has, the more powerful and the more relevant their output's going to be. So now this infrastructure, which is very achievable, we as strategists, it's like we've never had a library this good of first party and third party information to inform us about what's the next move for this business. So I feel so excited about this particular role and the way its future is setting up. Yeah.
So there's hope for the strategist.
There's hope.
That's good. All right, AI ecosystem monitor. I'll close it off. We've been going 55 minutes. This has been super fun. We can kind of begin to wrap a little bit, but this is essential for a human to keep an eye on the new tech stack. Jeff, you and I grew up, building CRM and building tech stacks around identity and media and creative and all the cool things in the old tool tech stack. And now we're saying we've got a whole new batch of tools that are coming. And we'll talk about that just for a hot sec. But essentially, we need someone to groom the agents and the APIs and groom and make sure the data is coming in and all the good stuff. So I'm going to quickly just show you a picture that I like from Eric Sui of Single Grain. He's a fantastic agency guy, and he's showing here Hermes at the middle. I'm a Hermes person, and on the left is Obsidian, which is your permanent memory. You've got HubSpot, your CRM. He's got Slack, which I love as well, which helps organize all kinds of work streams, so you can have multiple people in those work streams. And then, YouTube and X and Facebook and Google and all the other great APIs that are coming in. And then you have agents on the right that are actually going to be programmed to do work. And this is where we're taking, anything routine and repeatable that can be done, with an agent overnight or done continuously around outbound marketing and content marketing, creative, sales, message development, operations, sales calls, materials development, all the things that we're now going to, task to agents that have, good prompts, good skills, that also have a good base training data set, that hopefully is built on, your proprietary data in your organization that you have not given away to Claude, right? So then now you're building over time, in a compounding way. So your brain is getting smarter, more proprietary, faster, and works better and more efficiently. And then that gets to, your growth hypothesis as a company. And it's super fun and super cool. I'm going to just quickly, I think I'll skip over the agent first workflow map. I think we've sort of said this a couple of times. Anti-slop is an interesting concept. I think we've all seen, magnificent, long, emails and decks. And I think it's pretty clear that that's AI generated. We want to, if you are going to automate yourself, and we talk a lot about, Croom bot or Dr., so-and-so bot, we can do that and we should do that. There's a way to help agentify KOLs across every language, overnight, right? So you could take an incredible doctor or speaker, put them in a peer-to-peer setting, for example, and have, human contact, but also archive what a great KOL can do. But you got to just sort of manage the overload. You got to throttle it back to that individual's tone and style and personality so that it comes across well, and just sort of managing, I think, volume. I'll let that go for now. But Jeff, give us some concluding thoughts on, let's start to wrap on, the overall playbook for our CXO community. We talk a lot about small organizations being powered and, getting their superpower on. We talk about huge enterprises that, that are also sort of in a state of transformation and change. Give us your thoughts, and we'll begin to kind of wrap this up here.
Absolutely. And look, we're at a terrific jumping off point here where, as you look across the C-suite, across commercial, and even more broadly, perhaps, in most cases, we still want the same things. So as a CEO, you can only move as fast as the organization can make decisions that are validated and can actually be executed against. But here's and true across the rest of the roles. But here's the thing. We now have infrastructure that can come in and help with that decisioning process. Talked about it earlier. We've never had better data to feed into the teams underneath each of these leadership roles. We've never had more data that's been more processed and refined and analyzed into insights that can be used every day in these roles. So as a result, when we think about what's the playbook look like for healthcare leadership, it's about keeping the things we already know how to do and selectively choosing where we can put accelerators in. And those accelerators typically look like higher quality data, more signals, higher quality interpretation of those things, resulting in higher quality decisions, more predictive, more accurate going forward. And then what that allows us to do is pivot from here over to how do we get that done? And Kroom is going to take you into that next step. What would that look like?
Yeah, great. And I love the notion of predictive, right? Mm-hmm. So much of what we're doing commercially, or even in the healthcare setting, or even in treatment selection, or even with diagnostics or longevity care, gets to be about getting the right medication to the right patient at the right time so they have a more likely outcome. And there's so many different ways into that. But the more we can do predictive scoring to say, this is more likely to help patient X, then great, because we're really focused on right treatment, right person, right time, helping our physicians make those decisions, helping our reps bring great value to doctors, helping our marketing and brand leaders do the best work of their lives. And so, so as a result, we named our agency Predictive Healthcare, a couple of years back when we started off, because that really was the inspiration then, and it's still true now. And so there are a couple of ways that we would love to help you, build your AI augmented operating system. Number one is, it's a DIY, it's a do it yourself. We would love to give you access to all of our playbooks, all of our prompts, and access to our platform that we built that is a commercial engine. We call that singlebrain.health. And so, that will be available, and we would welcome you and urge you to take our content and our prompts and use them in your own business setting. The second is done with you, where we will be embedded with you, forward engineers, commercially and from an AI standpoint to help support your team, build out your team capabilities. We've talked about the archetypes, to deliver this as a training to help your team get really great at operating, around a single brain architecture. And then finally done for you, which is where, we're embedded completely as a fractional role on your team, as a fractional commercial officer or marketing officer, growth officer. Any of those roles are fantastic, where we really sit side by side with our CEOs to help them be successful in implementing the strategic considerations, the human considerations, and then obviously bringing forward transformation in terms of the tech stack and around the new North Star. Jeff, final word to you. We've been going for an hour and 3 minutes. Final thoughts, sir.
Find an easy way, find a high value way that you can get started, because this transformation is waiting for you. If you have the team and the talent and the appetite for testing, maybe that DIY approach really works for you. But if you're interested in moving more quickly with guidance and with more purpose, and perhaps within a more structured pilot where you've really built a way of kind of testing pre-post A/B, what's this really delivering, then you probably are looking at something that is done with you and done for you, or some combination thereof. But the key is to get started so that you can understand where am I in that process? How rapidly can I achieve the value? How rapidly can I accumulate the value that's waiting for me?
Yeah, awesome. Jeff, love working with you. So much fun being together today. Hope you'll come back on HealthFounderOS. We stream live every Sunday at noon. So please join us. And Jeff, great to be with you.
Kroom, thanks so much. Everyone, really appreciate your time and your attention, and happy to reconnect in any way that makes sense for all of you. Thank you.
More fun to come. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Take care. Have a great day. Bye now.